Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrive by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 175, we sit down with Alexa Suess, a lifelong North Fork resident and small business owner. Alexa is the founder of Common Ground Fine Jewelry in Greenport, where she combines traditional craftsmanship with modern design inspired by the natural beauty of the East End. With a background in graphic design from the School of Visual Arts, she's built a career that bridges creativity and community, serving the Greenport BID, women entrepreneurs in business, and the North Fork Chamber of Commerce. She also founded the Common Ground Design, an entrepreneurial scholarship to support local students. Now as a candidate for Southold Town Council, Alexa hopes to bring her passion for small business, affordable housing, and sustainable growth to local government. In our conversation, we talk about her family's roots on the North Fork, the role of design and nature in her work, and what inspired her to step into public service. So I hope you enjoy episode 175 with Alexa Suess. This episode was recorded August 12th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. It's really great to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Chris.
And so in the beginning, I'd like to just start off if you can give a little background about yourself, where you were born and raised, and even if you can go back farther out here.
Sure, yeah. So I was born and raised in Greenport. I lived on 5th Avenue for most of my childhood, and my parents moved here in around 1993. Mm-hmm. So my mother was a florist for a while, and then my father was in marine electronics. Yeah. So he worked in the marine industry. Both of them were the first people to move here of their families. So I'm not a part of a legacy family that has been here for 15 generations, but I certainly was born and raised here and have a lot of history with both Greenport and the town of Southold.
And did they say exactly what attracted them to the area?
At the time,
yes.
Affordability.
Okay.
Ironically.
Yes.
So my mother and my father were actually part of the team. Their names are Robin and Richard Suess. Were part of the team that was working on restoring the Regina Maris, which was a tall ship that had docked in Greenport for a while. So in that restoration effort, they had come out to Greenport quite a lot. At the time, they were living in Port Jefferson, and kind of fell in love with Greenport and were looking for an affordable place to move. So they found an old Victorian home and worked really, really hard to try to restore it and eventually live in it. So it was them and a team of quite a few local community members, some of which might listen to this podcast and go, oh yeah, I remember that, who restored this old Victorian while also working on the Regina Maris project.
Yes. And so just to talk about you a bit, for growing up in Greenport, how would you describe it as a child, and maybe what activities would you do in the area?
Yeah, so I've been coming to Floyd Memorial Library since I was about 2 feet tall. So wow. I spent a lot of time at the library when I was a kid. I was kind of a bookworm. So growing up in Greenport was really interesting in that it was such a special place to be as a child because the community was so tight-knit. And even when I was young, I remember going to Aldo's to get a hot chocolate and being able to speak with Mayor Capel at the time, which was really an amazing thing. When you think about it, how many other places can a young kid go and get a coffee or a hot chocolate and talk to the mayor, and the mayor is willing to talk to a young person. So that was really an amazing that was the amazing thing about Greenport is the community. And Greenport has always sort of been sort of the black sheep of Southold Town in a lot of ways. But its people really are the ones that make it so special, truly. So I spent a lot of my time going to the beach and fishing and going to the library and spending time in, what's now really, really beautiful downtown area in Mitchell Park. So I really had the privilege of being able to learn and grow in a really supportive and close-knit area.
Yes. And could you talk about your time in Greenport School and how that was, and what were you gravitating towards in terms of subject matter, or even coming out of high school?
Sure. I was kind of a history buff and an art lover. So between the two things, I have always been interested in sort of the systems of history, how history repeats itself over and over again, and how that can be translated into art and media. So in some ways, it's funny, I was raised by two people, one of which was incredibly artistic and the other who is incredibly systems-based. So I found that even now I can look back at it and go, wow, I really was able to grab a little bit from both of my parents. So growing up, I was always between sort of technology and art and history, the old, the new, the current, and found myself sort of gravitating more towards an art form that was specific and an art form that was almost mathematic in nature. So it's funny because metalsmithing always came back into the picture for me. So when I was a child, there was nowhere to really learn that skill. So I'm currently a metalsmith for a living. I do a couple things for a living, but one of my jobs is I'm a metalsmith. There wasn't really anywhere to learn that when I was a kid, but I tried so many different mediums to try to find something that I really loved. I tried glass blowing, I tried painting, I tried all of these things. I tried drafting. And two things that I really fell in love with were metal and digital and sort of more systemic artwork. So I always say like metalsmithing is more engineering oftentimes than it is art. So combining those two things, combining a sort of like engineering, an interest in engineering, an interest in systems and art and community, really combining those two things it was sort of the path that life took me down. So, when I graduated Greenport High School, I remember sitting down with a mentor of mine. And I had gotten great grades and I was going to a good college. But I remember a mentor sitting down with me and saying, Alexa, if you want to be successful, you have to leave the North Fork. There's nothing here for you. You're not going to make it if you stay here. Now, I grew up pretty poor. So they were really trying to get me out into the world to find systems that worked for me, to find an education that worked for me. So I believe they had my best interest at heart. I do. But at the same time, that's incredibly heartbreaking for somebody to say that, to say, you're never going to do anything here. There's no opportunities for you here. So that was a really eye-opening moment for me, I think, as a young person. Was saying, well, why can't I stay here? Why are there no opportunities here? Why can't I, make something of myself here? So I did. I moved away. I moved to New York City. I went to university there. But I always knew that I wanted to come back and reinvest in the North Fork. In some capacity. I didn't quite know what that meant at the time, but in some capacity, and entrepreneurship was always sort of a through line in my life. So it just made sense that I would come back to the North Fork and go for like an entrepreneurial route. And that's exactly what I did.
And you studied in New York City, but then would transition back to here. What was the time frame of that?
Yeah. So it's complicated. And the reason that it's complicated is, as I mentioned, I grew up pretty poor. So going to university was something that I really wanted to do. I wanted to be essentially the first person in my family to go to college. And I worked really, really hard to do that. But what they didn't tell me as an 18-year-old was exactly how much that was going to cost and exactly how it would be funded. Because I can tell you, as a Greenport student, I got all the scholarships in the world. I mean, just name them, and I got that scholarship, most likely. But it just wasn't enough to cover the educational costs that I needed. So I ended up going to school for about 2 years, and then I had to leave because I ran out of money. My parents had filed for bankruptcy a couple of years prior to that, so they couldn't co-sign any of the loans necessary to continue my education. And so I was sort of left stuck between a rock and a hard place, going, I really want to continue. I'm on the dean's list. I'm doing great. I love this. I want to complete this education, but I just can't because I don't have the funding. And even working full time while going to school wasn't enough. So it sort of forced my hand to leave. And in some ways, I was devastated when that happened. Devastated. I worked so hard. I really, really did. But also, in other ways, I look back and think that that was sort of a blessing. Because if that had not have happened, I might not have the business I have today. I might not be in this community today in the same way that I am now. It's hard. It's definitely, looking back, a lot of mixed feelings there. But I am grateful that allowed me to really come back and buckle down and say, listen, entrepreneurship is the path forward. This is the right path for me. And I'm going to push as hard as I can to make sure that, I'm a small business owner that makes it.
Yes. And can you talk a little bit about how your business, Common Ground Fine Jewelry, got started and bringing that to fruition in Greenport?
Yeah, so I started metalsmithing when I was 20 years old.
Okay.
Sort of, self-taught mostly. And it felt very natural to me as somebody who's both systems-based and kind of anal retentive and also creative. As I mentioned, it's just as much engineering as it is art. So it felt right. So I started working with metal around 20, and I fell in love with jewelry really when I was in high school. And I had a guidance counselor who told me that you can't do that for a living because you're never going to make enough money to make a living off of it. So I kept doing it still as a hobby, but I never pursued a career in it until after schooling. So I came back to it just as a hobby, and I honed my skills very much self-taught until I was able to go back to the new school. So the new school is in New York. They do non-degree courses. I was able to go back there after I had saved up a little bit of money and take some non-degree metalsmithing courses, adult ed courses. That really helped me hone my skills. I then later became a gemologist, which is sort of a separate path. But making those pieces really kind of sparked something in me. I enjoy making things that are durable and things that will last for generations. That's really my focus. And I hesitate to call myself an artist just because I don't really, honestly, I don't really feel attached to that tag. But I do consider myself a really good designer because a designer has to work with both form and function. And for me, what I do has to function just as much as it is beautiful. So long story short, I did a lot of self-teaching. I went back to school. And then while I was sort of working on the North Fork, I worked in Greenport for quite a while. I started making more things, and I started posting them on social media, and people started to get interested in them. So, I've come from the digital age. I think they call them like digital natives now. So I grew up with social media, for better or for worse. Lots to be said about that. But people started to get interested. And so I started selling my pieces at a local shop. And I have to tell you, the community that sort of surrounded me during that time was amazing. I had so many people who were so supportive of what I was doing and who believed in my craft and where I was going and the things that I could make. So I started selling pieces at a local shop. And then my employment changed. A few things in my life had changed and sort of upended. And I met with Susan Pridham, who is my business partner. We've been business partners for about 8 years. So I met with her, and I went into her shop. She owned a shop called Blue Ruth in Greenport for about 12 years. And I went in to have coffee with her, and she almost jumped over the counter at me saying, "Oh God, I need to close the store. I can't do this anymore." And she was saying that because she was doing it alone. She owned a retail store alone. And that's very, very difficult to do all of that alone. So she sort of just blurted out of nowhere, "Hey, do you want a partner?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't know about that. Let me think on it." And I did, and I thought on it. And Susan's an amazing person. She has been a big part of the Greenport community for many, many years. And she, like myself, had sort of an extensive history in Greenport, owning a business there. So it was only natural that we partnered together and created this business now that we've had for 8 years. And throughout that time, lots of things have changed in the world. We got through a pandemic. We got through a lot. And we've stayed really, really strong because what we do is we make things that are beautiful and things that will last. And that's important to me. I want you to be able to, if you purchase a ring from me, I have the incredible privilege of working with people, both sometimes on their best days and their worst days, right? I make engagement rings and wedding bands, and I've made divorce rings before, kind of funny. I've made, memorial pieces, and those things will last for generations. And so I've had the privilege of really being connected to the community in that way, and that people come to me in these really life-changing points and trust me with that process.
Yeah.
So, long story short, we've had the business, like I said, for 8 years. And in those 8 years, we've, like any small business owner will tell you, you have to sort of duck and dive and adapt. But we've been able to really create a place that is super kind and super welcoming and really, I believe, really a positive addition to Greenport Village.
Yes.
It's a place of community. We try really, really hard to be a place of community. Yeah.
And could you walk us through some of the techniques you've learned, or even for designing some of your work, just the creative process, and what maybe inspires because it's all uniquely designed or inspired by your own creative look on the jewelry?
Yeah. So first and foremost, like I mentioned before, I think durability is really what I'm after. So when I'm making something, I want to ensure that I make it so that people can wear it every day, and that it's practical, and that it can be repaired if it needs to be repaired, and that it lasts, like I said, for generations. So my main sort of focus when I make something is sourcing materials ethically is incredibly important to me, and that's something that I've been focusing on for many, many years. I was just in Africa a couple of months ago to do some sourcing and meet some of the miners. So sourcing materials is incredibly important. So I only use recycled gold, for example. There's no reason to use virgin gold when we have enough golds in the world. So I use recycled gold. I use recycled sterling silver. I use as many recycled metals as I can, heirloom stones, things that people have had for generations. I try really, really hard to use recycled materials. And if I can't use recycled materials, then I try hard to ensure that the materials that I am using are sourced in a way that is ethical, and sourced in a way that is environmentally sound. And I have conversations with people every day about where this material comes from and what it means. And what it means for communities that sell it, and what it means for the people who actively buy it and resell it. I mean, the sort of jewelry industry is very, very opaque. And I know that. And so what I'm trying to do is open it up and make it as transparent as humanly possible. but I approach this sort of design process almost with an analytical brain because, as I mentioned before, I kind of have a background in digital construction. I also kind of, to the side, I also have a background in data analytics, which is, I know, kind of an offshoot. People see a creative person and say, oh, they must not be into data or numbers, and that's not true at all. I really love to balance both. So I think that, you can take a digital approach, you could take a data-based approach, you could take an analytical approach to an issue, whether that's designing something or whether that's a systems issue or like a municipal systems issue. And you can take that approach and add creativity to it. And then there you go, you have creative problem solving, right? So balancing both the analytical side and the creative side is definitely a strong suit of mine. And I think that has helped in my business, and that's helped in my community work, and that's helped in a lot of areas of my life. Yeah.
Yes. And just being a business owner and community leader, you're involved in several local organizations, even including the Greenport BID, entrepreneurs in business. What's the most rewarding part about giving back to your community in this way?
Yeah, so I want to say that I've had a sort of a small hand. I sort of have my fingers and everything. I've had a small hand in all of these organizations. I've had the privilege of working and volunteering for CAST. I've done design for the Greenport BID or Business Improvement District. I mean, I've kind of done a little bit of everything, and I like it that way because I really enjoy getting to view community problems from different perspectives. So it's all sort of empowering, and it's all beneficial in that way because you get to connect different sort of corners of the community to other corners. Like I mentioned, when I was growing up here, I mean, it's such a tight-knit community, and I love it like that. I really, really do. I love the fact that you could present a problem and that you could have 4 or 5 community leaders come in from different angles and approach that problem in different ways. And that is what I think leadership is all about, right? So whether you're talking about government, local government, larger government, or you're talking about nonprofit, or you're talking about just a community group like a civic association, they all have their place because they all bring their own really kind of sort of unique perspectives. So it's amazing. I've loved working with all of those groups, whether they're nonprofits or otherwise.
Yes. And before we get into why you're running for town board, I just wanted to ask about, you had founded the Common Ground Design Entrepreneurial Scholarship to support graduating students on the North Fork. What was behind that initiative, and does that even connect with your own upbringing and coming out of high school?
Definitely. Yeah. First, I want to support graduates because I think we have to recognize that young people right now are going through a really difficult time in so many ways, but especially economically. Yes. So first and foremost, trying to support young local graduates is incredibly important. So it was also influenced by, my experience in going to college and running out of money. And my experience in then sort of switching to an entrepreneurial path. And I want to also support kids that are not necessarily pursuing a college or university or a degree program. Because there are kids that, want to go into the trades, or there are kids that want to start a business. And I want to make sure that they are supported just as much as those who are going into a degree program. And it's unfortunate. A lot of people don't see it that way. I think there's a lot of people who think that the only track is to go to a university and complete a program. But there are so many other directions that a young person can take and still be successful. And entrepreneurship is a big one. And I think we need to be fostering it more here on the North Fork and across the entire country, honestly.
Definitely. And then now I just wanted to ask, why you decided to run for the Southold Town Board, and what sparked your interest in that?
Yeah, it was a complicated decision. I'll be completely honest with you, Chris. It's I've been involved with local politics my whole life. As I mentioned kind of in the beginning, I mean, I had a hot chocolate with Dave Capel and, when I was a kid. And I've always had an interest, again, in systems, right? How systems work, especially how local municipal systems work, because a lot of people talk down to local politics as though it doesn't mean anything. And the truth is that local politics is sort of the most important branch of politics out of all of them. I mean, yes, everybody sort of pays attention to presidential elections, but do you pay attention to the elections locally where you're going to actually see the most change in your everyday life?
Yes.
In how your ability to rent a house, your ability to control how and what you do with your property, your ability to find a local job. All of those things are heavily influenced by local elections. And I think a lot of people forget that. So my decision to run was based on that. Like I mentioned, I've been sort of going to meetings my whole life and consistently asked, why are you here? By people who are attending, because I was the youngest one in the room consistently. Actually, just in a meeting it was about 2 months ago, I had somebody sit next to me and ask me, why are you here? You're too young to be here, which I think is so strange. And I have to explain, I'm like, because I care, because I live here. And I care about what my community looks like and what's protected. So I'm running because I'm looking around at the North Fork as a whole, and I'm seeing young people and young families fleeing in droves because they cannot afford to live here anymore. And even as a young person myself, I have to sort of step back and ask, what is happening here? And is anything being done to stop that? Because this is an issue that everybody needs to be worried about. Demographic issues are big issues, and we're seeing this all across the country as well. But here, if we get rid of our entire working class, and if we just ignore the young families that actually want to stay here but can't, that's a problem. That's a big problem, not just for those young families, but for everybody.
Yes. And we lose, or it changes the community, and people have talked about it becoming more of a tourist or retirement community, and then what happens to the schools? Where is that healthy balance for the whole demographic out here? And that's something that we really need to address.
That's exactly right, Chris. And I like to think about this like an ecosystem, right? So if you think about an ecosystem, you have a microbe that is beneficial for another organism, and that organism is beneficial for another organism, right? So our local economy and our local community is an ecosystem, and we need to be able to keep that healthy and keep it balanced. And right now, that is not happening. So it's funny because I talk to a lot of people who say, hey, you're running for office. That's fantastic. Don't change anything. And while I completely understand where that comes from, I really do. Because if you have something beautiful and something that you cherish, you don't want to see it changed. And I understand that. That resonates with me. I get it. At the same time, I have to sort of remind people that this is an ecosystem, and that if you like going out and getting fresh oysters, or you like picking up peaches at a local farmer's market, or you like being able to call a plumber because your toilet is broken, or if you like a firefighter who's a volunteer answering your 911 call, then you need people to do that. So saying don't change anything is not the solution. Show me a place that hasn't changed in the past 20 years. It doesn't exist. So instead, what we have to do is we have to figure out how to balance it. And that's always been the perennial issue of Southold Town and of our local communities, is how do you balance everything? And I think, for the record, Southold Town has done an amazing job at protecting our local waters and preserving open spaces and local farmland. An incredible job.
Yes.
I mean, Al Krupski is a force. He really is. So I want to give them credit where credit is due.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, again, we have sort of failed at providing the human infrastructure that's needed to keep people here and to keep young families here and to keep working class people here and to keep people who do all of those things. Our plumbers, our oyster farmers, our, the person you talk to every day at the IGA, those people have to live somewhere. And we have to support them if we want a community, because otherwise all we get is sort of Disneyland where nobody actually lives. It's very pretty, but nobody actually lives there.
Yes.
So small business plays a big part in that as well, because if you want people to live here, then people also have to be able to work here. And once again, I think balancing all of this is incredibly difficult. And that is the job of our legislators. That's the job of the Southold Town Board. That's the job of the supervisor. That's the job of the trustees. And it's a difficult job, but it's one that we really, really have to focus on because our working class families, our young families need more support. They really do.
Yes. And like you said, with preserving open space has been a priority, and people would talk about what we need to, at least compared to the rest of Long Island, which has been developed. How do we balance that, and what way would you go about in terms of housing and affordable housing? What do you think should be done that way in the town of Southold?
Yeah, so it's a difficult issue, and difficult issues rarely have one simple solution. So we can go through a few different solutions. But first and foremost, I think when I mention housing, there's a lot of people that get very reactionary, and reasonably so, and say, don't put condos in the middle of a farm field. And they're completely correct. We should not be putting condos in the middle of a farm field. That's not what I want to do. So I need to make that very clear. Preserving open space and preserving agricultural land is incredibly important. First of all, it's incredibly important for the environment. Second of all, it's incredibly important for our local agricultural sector, which, I mean, is a huge driver of jobs here. So I don't want to do anything that will compromise that. What we do have to do is instead think about moving back to the comprehensive plan that was created previously by the previous town board. They did a fantastic job on the comprehensive plan. In looking at that comprehensive plan, you can take a look at what's called halo zones, and those are zones that go around hamlet centers. And the whole idea of a halo zone is that it will allow the building and development of more densely built properties, right? So the whole idea is to leave this sort of beautiful agricultural rural character for the rest of the town. And then in our hamlet centers, we build up more housing. Now, building up more housing doesn't mean skyscrapers. It doesn't mean 7-story buildings. It does mean considering things like infill. And infill is basically where we take any sort of property that could have additional space and placing an ADU on it, or an accessory dwelling unit. It means considering making or zoning certain properties R2 by right, which means that you could take a single family home and make it a 2-family home by right. We should consider those opportunities for what's called infill. Some people call it the missing middle, meaning that, it's not a giant single family luxury home, but it's also not a tiny apartment. There's a lot in between those two dwelling types that could solve our problems.
Yes.
Another thing is putting more of our community housing fund into different programs like first-time homebuyer programs, which is something that East Hampton recently started doing, which I think is a great idea. Our community housing fund currently is sitting north of $5 million. So they have collected through taxation, they've collected more than $5 million. And those funds are currently not being used for much of anything. Now, in the town's defense, they are currently working on a plan to use that funding. And I believe they are first prioritizing using that funding for developer credits. So there's a lot of different ways to look at this, but I think we need to balance both the idea of home ownership and leases and rentals. Because I think there's also a lot of people who think that the only way to fix the housing crisis is to get people owning homes. And while getting people owning homes is fantastic, I think it's a great goal, We also have to recognize that not everybody is able to own a home for whatever reason. I think it's important to point out right now, I actually looked at these numbers this morning just to confirm them. The median home price in Southold Town right now is just north of $1 million. It's like 1.1 million. Yeah, it's a crazy amount of money. But the median income for Southold is only about $145,000. Now, using those two numbers, that means that the majority of current homeowners in Southold Town could not actually afford to currently buy their own home because they don't make enough. You have to have, I believe, an income. The suggested income for buying a $1 million home is about $250,000 a year. So you're about $100,000 short for most people. Now, there's a lot of nuance in there. There's assets. There's a bunch there. But my point is that we have to recognize that what we are currently dealing with is a true housing crisis, not just for those who are low income, quote unquote. We're not talking about people who make $30,000 a year. We're talking about the fact that people who make $100,000 a year cannot own a home and would not even be considered for a typical mortgage, a 30-year mortgage here. That's a problem.
Yes.
And while I would like to solve that tomorrow, the problem is not going to be solved by tomorrow. So we need to also consider something like community housing, which would allow more people to rent government-owned units. And I know as soon as I say that, there's a bunch of people who are getting ready to send in angry comments. But listen, community housing, social housing is a really, really important step to potentially own a home at some point if people want to do that. Not everybody wants to own a home. I think that's another thing that we should mention. So if you want to continue living here and working here and you are not eligible to own a home because maybe you don't make enough income, because that income line right now is very, very high, then you should still be able to stay in the community. And we can help with that via rental subsidies, and we can help with that via community housing. So there's a lot of different options. There's a lot of angles to take here. And anybody who says that they're going to be able to solve this really large issue with one simple solution is lying. I can tell you right now, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. But there are lots of little solutions that we can stack on top of each other to make owning or renting a home here much easier.
Yes. Like you said, either maybe rent to buy or just rent at a subsidized rate that the town or government can provide for them. And I think that is important to make sure that it is within the hamlet area and not a sprawl throughout the town of Southold. Do you worry about, because another issue that would come up with that is transportation and traffic and how we would deal with that. And some people, I think, say that most of the traffic we get is more in the summertime, so it might not be as bad then. But just your thoughts on public transportation and traffic out here linked with housing.
Yeah, so it's funny. I was just having a conversation with somebody about this yesterday, and they made the point that, if you can't afford to live here, then you just shouldn't be here. And I said, okay, that's a fair point. I mean, there's nothing to really rebut there. I mean, if you can't afford to live here, then you can't afford to live here. That is just the reality of it. But what I say to somebody like that is, listen, if you say that you never want to become the Hamptons, what you're describing are the Hamptons, right? You're describing large swaths of land with really sprawling, large homes. And you're describing a workforce that cannot afford to live anywhere near where they work. And you're describing a massive line of traffic every single day so that those people can go from, wherever they live, maybe Ronkonkoma, right, wherever, Center Reach, to their jobs out in the Hamptons. And so when people start complaining about traffic, my rebuttal to that is, listen, I understand that. I don't want to sit in traffic either. Nobody wants to sit in traffic. But if the solution is just having people commute every single day, if having our entire workforce has to commute every single day, you're going to have Hamptons-type traffic. So maybe instead, let's consider people actually living where they work. And believe it or not, that traffic won't be as bad.
Yes.
And yes, our traffic is certainly bad during the months of July, August, September, the sort of summer tourism season, and also the agricultural tourism season of September and October. But there are trade-offs here, right? And that trade-off is, if you want a giant line of traffic, a trade parade as they call it, then no, nobody has to live here because they work here. But if you want people to be able to bike to work or take a bus to work, then you need to be able to put them somewhere close to where they work.
Yes.
So there's a lot to be said about public transit. That's a kind of a whole different conversation. But also ensuring that we keep density in hamlet centers will also help that public transportation conversation. Because obviously if you're in a hamlet center, you have much more readily available access to things like the S92 bus line, for instance. Yeah.
Yes. And then just to change it a bit more towards, even as a small business owner, what are your thoughts on the small businesses out here? And do you worry about, with some of the bigger corporations where people might order from Amazon, do you worry that, because people would talk about, even in the 70s, Greenport was a little more, a lot of the storefronts were closed, but do you worry about that out here with businesses, or they're just being big chains and not many small businesses left?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think what we're seeing right now is, coming back to sort of the idea of the Hamptons, is we're seeing a very similar thing happen to the North Fork. And that is real estate prices increase sharply. And small business owners cannot keep up with their overhead because all of a sudden their rent has tripled. They close, and then the only entities left that can pay that amount are, private equity backed businesses. And once that happens, it's very difficult to reverse that. So I'm exceptionally concerned about our small business community for a number of reasons. That's one of the reasons. I mean, overhead from insurance to a rent release has increased sharply. And, we could talk about the price of goods and everything. But not only that, I'm also concerned because I think that Southold Town has actually made it quite difficult to be an entrepreneur or to be a small business owner here. There really isn't a clear path if you want to open a business.
There's no really incentives.
There's no guidance.
There's
no guidance. And that's a huge concern. And that's something the Economic Development Committee in Southold has been trying to tackle and to work on. And I applaud them for doing it, because if I'm a small business owner and I want to open up a bike shop in Southold Town, it's very difficult for me to sift through hundreds of pages of code to try to determine where I could potentially go, what is required for me to open, like what are the sign requirements and why do I have to go to 3 meetings in order to have everything approved. And it's such a shame because we really lose out on, one, the economic gain of having a small business in Southold Town, but 2, you also lose out on a potential community member, right? Small business owners are really the drivers of our local economy. And if you ask any small business owner how much they have given to, numerous nonprofits and projects and whatnot, I mean, as a small business owner, you're always getting solicited for, like giveaways or gift cards. And a lot of us are completely fine with doing that because we're community members and we want our community to be healthy, and we want to be able to hire people, and we want to be able to live here ourselves, and we want to be able to be successful, and we want everybody else in the area to be successful. So I'm incredibly concerned. I think that there's a lot of powers at play here that truthfully Southold Town and individual small business owners don't have a lot of control over. Right? The economic point, we could talk about globalization. We could talk about tariffs. We could talk about all of that. That certainly has its role to play in the difficulties that small businesses go through. But I would really like to see Southold Town be a little bit more small business friendly. I really would. I think that if you want to open a business here, there should be, a packet, a digital sort of PDF or whatever that tells you, hey, listen, welcome. Here's what you have to do. Here's who to contact if you want to do it. And we want you to come here, and we want you to succeed, and we want you to be an employer. It's incredibly important. And I really, I hope that Southold starts valuing their small businesses a little bit more.
Yes. And we talked about housing and small businesses. Are there there's probably a lot of issues, but are there another top issue that you really want to prioritize and really work on? That's probably in your top 3 or 5 most important issues.
Yeah. So a couple more would be preserving agricultural land is incredibly important to me. I mentioned it before. Preserving agricultural land ensures that it's still productive in an economic sense, but it is protected in sort of like a rural character sense, right? So it will not be developed. It will be used for agriculture. Supporting and maintaining our agricultural and aquaculture sectors are incredibly important. I mean, they're a large driver of our economic strength here in Southold, so they should be supported. And there's also water conservation, so we could talk about how that affects the aquifer and my concerns about the aquifer and access to water here. And I have to say, the Southold Town trustees have been an incredible force for good when it comes to protecting our local waterways. I mean, really amazing. I think you had Dr. Eric Sepp on.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a poet when it comes to this topic. But so there's a lot to be said about conservation and also preservation when used in the right way. Preservation is incredibly important. I just don't want it to outweigh the rest of the community because, like I mentioned before, I think that we need to rebalance a little bit, and we need to ensure that our land is protected, but also our community is protected, and the people who live and work here are protected.
Yes. And are you concerned with climate change and just us being, we do stick out a bit, and we are a coastal community just with sea level rise, and like you said, the water quality in our aquifer, and just erosion or runoff?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So storm drain runoff is a huge problem here. I'd say in the past 4 years, there's been a really big push to reduce the amount of storm runoff, at least directly into the bay, and instead directing it over gardens and planted items in order to ensure that water actually gets back down into the aquifer instead of just being thrown into the bay. So all of those things help our aquifer. Preserving open space helps our aquifer. It allows water to seep into the aquifer where it came. Same thing with preserving farmland. Again, this is where we come back to agriculture has a huge part to play here. And I really want to see it stay that way. And as far as erosion goes, oh yeah, just look at Southold Town Beach on the north side during the winter, and you'll see that there's no beach left.
Yes.
So partnering with other conservation entities and partnering with the county and even partnering with the state, we're talking about really big problems here. So we need big solutions, and we need a lot of firepower to do that. So I'm looking forward to see who we can bring together in order to fund the solutions for that.
And what would be something that you'd want to get done, not first few days, but first few months in office that you feel should be accomplished?
Definitely. If it's not done by then, and I really would urge the current board to consider this, if it's not done by then, we should be a pro-housing community. That is a designation granted by New York State. And that designation automatically allows us access to a ton of funding, both for consultants or for housing projects or for programs for first-time homebuyers, right? That fund is available for us to use. We've just thus far chosen to not take it. And we're one of the only townships in Suffolk County that has chosen to not take it, which I think is interesting. The other thing is we desperately, again, need to make it easier for small businesses to open. So creating, this is really, it's such low hanging fruit, honestly, is just creating a guidebook, a map for small businesses and how they can work with their communities to open a really fruitful and viable and prosperous small business that hires local people and keeps the character of Southold Town, because I know that that's incredibly important. You know, we don't want to become Brookhaven.
Yes. Yes. And even just with growing up here and seeing the North Fork change over time, do you think even since COVID it's changed rapidly from that time? And like you said, globalization and other things can play into that, and people moving away to either going like south or where they can afford something. But does the North Fork still feel like where you grew up in some ways, but that it has changed?
Yeah, it's still, like I said, the community here is incredible. I mean, if you need help, your neighbor will help you. And I really don't want to lose that feeling. I don't. I don't want to live in a place where nobody knows their neighbors. And that's what I wish to preserve. I want the community to stay. And I want people from all backgrounds and people of all ages and people of all professions. That's what makes a community. That's what makes up the fabric of America, is that diversity of everything.
Yes.
Because if we all do the same thing and we all have the same house and we all, think the same way, then what's the point? Move to Levittown, right?
Yes.
But we all have to be a part of this ecosystem where we work for one another, where we help one another. And I still see that. And I'm desperately trying to preserve that. Desperately.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you mentioned someone told you that there's nothing out here, and that we are seeing students that graduate and they might not see a career out here. But just even you as an example of someone that came back and started a career here and got involved in the community, it shows that obviously even with I think for young people in general, it's tough to have the job and then create time to even run and be involved in the community. So, but you're able to make that work.
Yeah, I could tell you right now that running for office is not, the whole process is not meant for a working class person. It's very difficult if you have a job or multiple jobs.
Yes.
And even my running mate, Bryant Mealy, can tell you that. It's incredibly difficult, but I think it's really important. Yes. Because, we can't all keep sitting around saying, oh, that's too bad. Somebody should do something about that. And then nobody ever does anything about it. You want to see change, you have to instigate it. And that's why I'm running.
Yes.
That's why I'm running. I want to see people who are not able to make the 4 p.m. meeting at town hall because they have a job or they have multiple jobs or they have a family to take care of. I want to make sure that those people still get a voice in the government, because sometimes all we see are the loudest people who have the most time on their hands representing communities. And that's not a representation of the whole community. It's just not.
Yes. And I wanted to just ask about your working with a wide range of people on a committee. What do you think you would bring? I think you've talked about it already, but just providing a voice for younger people in the working class. But what do you think your leadership would be in working with a wide group of people on the town board that have a wide range of opinions? And
oh, certainly, yeah. Yeah, you ask 5 people, you get 7 different opinions. That's just the nature of it, right? So we all bring our strengths to the town board. And I think that I can really bring a few things. One is, as I mentioned before, I'm a digital native. So I grew up with technology. I'm familiar with technology. I use technology every day. So being able to implement some of that technology, being able to implement the analysis of large data sets, for example, or the ability to more quickly digitize Southold Town's records. All of those things are incredibly important because without that data, it's very difficult to make really sound decisions. So gathering data and being able to analyze it in a sort of time-sensitive way is incredibly important. So I'd like to bring a sort of fresh, data-driven perspective to leadership. And I'd also, like I mentioned, I want to represent people who are not always represented. I want to represent young people here. I want to represent working class people here. I want to represent the people who can't come to every meeting because there are a lot of people who cannot.
Yes.
But those people should still be represented in government. And I also bring a perspective that is slightly younger and, like I said, a little bit more very focused, very fresh. And because I haven't sort of been mired in politics my whole life, I can bring a perspective that might not have otherwise been presented. Because I've found that when you are in a system for so long, sometimes you stop thinking about things a certain way and you only see everything in roadblocks. And while there is value to that, there's value to that knowledge. There's also value in being able to think about things from a new perspective.
And now just being out here and having a business out here, what do you enjoy most about living and working out here on the North Fork?
Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, the fact that I'm able to go and purchase a pint of cherry tomatoes and then go get some that were, farmed in a field a half mile away, and then go get some fresh oysters that were farmed in the bay, 5 miles away, and then go to Orient Point and sit with my dog and, enjoy the sort of fruits of the labors of everybody who has worked and lived on the North Fork. How incredible is that? I mean, generations of labor and generations of hope. We're able to enjoy all of that. And I don't take that for granted at all.
Yes. And we've talked about a lot of the issues and things you want to address, but I guess just in general, what would you hope to see the North Fork become, or do you want to see stay the same? Kind of a balance that way.
Definitely. Yeah. So like I said, I think that the preservation of open space is incredibly important. I mean, the fact that we can go for a walk on multiple different preserves that have been in some part funded by our community preservation funds is incredible. And preserved agricultural land, the fact that that is preserved and will not become, a luxury development, that's incredible. That's a fantastic thing. And that is something I wish to continue, because open space is something that not a lot of places have. A lot of places sell out all of their land for other use and they don't preserve any of it. And we have the privilege of having beautiful open space here to enjoy for the entire community. So I hope that stays the same. And I hope that we can keep that same sort of rural character. I also hope that our waterways stay healthy, and I really credit the trustees for that, town trustees for that. So I hope that our natural resources will be here for generations to enjoy. We need to prioritize that because without that, we don't have much of anything.
Yes. And I usually just ask at the end if there was anything else you'd like to say or discuss that we haven't touched on. There's probably a lot, but...
Chris, I could be here for 2 days. I don't have anything more to add. I don't think in a meaningful way, but I do encourage people to listen to your community members, to ask your neighbors what they think, to have conversations with people who you don't necessarily agree with. Sometimes I feel that we have forgotten how to do that. And it's incredibly important because at the end of the day, politics doesn't really matter that much. The fact that we all need clean water should not be political. That's just a fact. So take care of your neighbor. Talk to your neighbor. Go buy a tomato from a local farmer. go and visit your small business owners that are in your community. You know, we're all on the same team. We're all trying to do the same thing. We're just trying to survive and thrive and make sure this place is beautiful and make sure our families are taken care of. That's the goal.
Definitely. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your story and having this great business out here and your passion for our community. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 175 with Alexa Suess. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.